G'day ladies and gentlemen, how y'all doing? Scotty49 here with you once again for another installment in the Warhammer 40,000 for the New Guy series. Now in this video we're going to keep on looking at the Chaos Space Marines from the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and today's video we're going to be looking at their pros and cons as a faction, not only for you to be playing them on the tabletop, but also what they are like to maybe even hobby with and collect as a faction as well. But ladies and gentlemen, before we jump in, I want to thank everyone that has joined us here on the channel as of late. It is great to see you and welcome to the chapter. I want to extend that warm welcome to you as the chapter master. But ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into it. Alrighty everyone, so these pros and cons for the Chaos Space Marines, again, as I've said, are meant to give you a good idea of not only what they like to play with, but also what they are like to collect and hobby with. And so we're going to be looking at 3 different pros and 3 different cons for them to give you a nice, rounded, high-level look at what the faction is like in those areas. And so we're going to be starting off with the pros, and the first pro is that the Chaos Space Marines, much like their loyalist counterparts, are a jack-of-all-trades faction. Much like Space Marines, the Chaos Space Marines have the ability to field units that are able to perform many different functions or roles within an army. The Chaos Space Marines have got units that are able to field a solid amount of mobility or ranged firepower or close combat or psychic powers or force multiplying abilities that you can utilize to create the army that you feel comfortable with and wanting to use on the tabletop. So really, there's a lot of choices in there with the units that you're going to be able to take, whether it's Psychers, whether it's Terminators, whether it's heavy weapon troops like Havocs or Obliterators, whether it's fast demon engines that are great in close combat like the Mauler Fiend or even a Demon Prince or the Helldrake, for example. There's plenty to choose from within them as well, and they also get some Chaos Guardsmen, which is kind of sick now. Renegade Guardsmen are now included as a separate data slate, which you can take, which I think is awesome, in addition to also cultists and other units like that as well. The second pro of the Chaos Space Marines is that they're actually quite forgiving to play. Again, much like their loyalist counterparts, the Chaos Space Marines allow you to make a certain level of mistakes to be made when you're first learning them, when they're first playing, without them necessarily being detrimental to the game state when you're playing them. Now, this is due to them having a good base toughness of 4 for the majority of power armored units. Now, we'll say the cultist or the Renegade Imperial Guardsmen will be toughness 3, bear that in mind, but there's also other units that are toughness 5 or higher than that, as, you know, Possessed or Obliterators as well as having a good armor save value and a lot of their units being 3+ armor save, a great number of wounds with a minimum of 2 wounds for anyone in power armor. Again, the cultists will have a worse armor save and only 1 wound, same with the Renegade Guardsmen. And they will require, for those tougher units, to have a significant amount of effort put into them to be dealt with, and there are ways that you can buff certain units as well with various psychic powers or buffing abilities from, say, Masters of Possession or Dark Apostles and things like that as well. Now, the third pro for the Chaos Space Marines is they've got a variety of different units to fulfill similar roles. Again, much like their loyalist counterparts, and you're like, stop comparing to them loyalists, we're completely different. In this matter, you're not. Unfortunately, they've got a large variety of units that will be able to be taken in your army that will perform a similar role. However, the way that they do differentiate from their loyalist brothers in the Space Marines is they don't have a vast array of unit choices like the Space Marines do. They have a little bit more limited selection. Now, as I have previously mentioned, these units can have good mobility, different types of firepower, close combat ability, and different buffing abilities from psychic powers or sighting rituals, things like that. However, unlike regular Space Marines, they don't have the different types of Space Marines such as Firstborn or Primaris. So if you're going with Chaos Space Marines, you're generally going to be in the Firstborn style of armor, so generally 2 wounds. You won't necessarily get the big chunkier Intercessor style or the Inceptors or the heavy Intercessors like the Gravis style armor, unless maybe you're looking to convert up those models to count as Chaos Space Marines, for example, or do some chunkier Possessed. Things like that. Mind you, the new Possessed models are actually quite chunky. So there's a lot there to choose from in your codex and a lot of different benefit that you actually get when running them. Alrighty, so whilst yes, there are some great pros to playing at Chaos Space Marines, there are also some cons to be considered as well. And the first one is limited troop options. Now, the Chaos Space Marines might have a lot of variety in units that they can take across the board. However, in the troop slot, unfortunately, it is not one of them, as they've only got 4 different troop options now. When the Codex was released, it was originally 3, being the Legionnaires, so the basic Chaos Space Marines, Cultists, and a Curse Cultist, but now you've also got the option for Renegade Guardsmen as well as an additional data sheet that is free to download off the Warhammer community website. Now, this does mean you'll have less options to choose from when picking your troop choices for the army, as it is limited by one of your army core rules. If you are going to take more Cultist units than Chaos Space Marine units in an army, you can't do that. So you have to take more Chaos Space Marine units in general than Cultists, so bear that in mind during your list construction. So it means you may end up taking more Legionnaire units and paying more for that than you would like to, because you're not allowed to take more Cultists, which would make things a bit cheaper, allow you to get more units in there, for example. Con number 2 is they favor close combat more than ranged firepower. Whilst Chaos Space Marines have got similar range firepower capabilities as their Loyalist brothers, they do tend to favour close combat more. This is down to a variety of weapon options that they have the ability to take for melee weapons, as well as their base profile of Chaos Space Marines, for example, having more attacks in comparison to standard Loyalist Space Marines, being of a base attack of 3. For just a standard Chaos Space Marine is really strong. This can make it hard to play with them when you're first learning them, because if you do go down that close combat focused route with them, you're going to be learning how to best play them as an army, relying on more melee and more close combat power than shooting like some of the other armies and even like some of the Space Marine counterparts allow them to do. So bear that in mind. Of course, you can build firepower based Chaos Space Marine armies, but I think Chaos Space Marines do lend themselves more to a close combat heavy build. And con number 3 is that there are lots of details on the miniatures. This is more of a hobbying and painting con than a gameplay con for Chaos Space Marines, as unlike their Loyalist counterparts, they've got a lot, and I mean a lot, of detail on the miniatures. From armor trim to skulls, skin, mutations, iconography, so much more, scars, flames, different sigils. Like, there's so much detail on them that you can focus on painting each of these independent details and get bogged down in it very quickly. This, of course, does come down to how you want to paint them up and the method that you choose to use when doing so, which there are several techniques that you can make use of to speed up this process. If you aren't wanting to paint all of that trim, of course, you don't necessarily have to. Say, for example, you're painting Alpha Legion, their trim isn't really that visible at times, so maybe you just don't bother with it, or you know, be a bit more considered with your contrast you're putting over them, so that then it's like, okay, cool, we've put the contrast over it, we've already done like the silver base coat so you get the metallic look, but you're very careful with where you place the contrast over the armor so it doesn't go over the trim, for example. But overall, that is more of a hobbying and collecting style con, because it's going to take you more time to get them fully painted. Say if you play Black Legion, you're going to have to paint a lot, and I mean a lot, of gold trim. So bear that in mind. Overall, though, despite the cons that the Chaos Space Marines have, I believe that outside of the Space Marines and the Necrons, these are likely to be one of the better factions that you could start choosing to collect and start playing Warhammer 40k with, for very similar reasons as why the Space Marines are probably one of the better factions to start off with as well. But that's gonna wrap us up for looking at the pros and the cons of playing and collecting the Chaos Space Marines. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, I hope that you have enjoyed this video looking at the pros and the cons of the Chaos Space Marines as a player, and picking them up and looking to collect them as a faction, doing all the hobby with it as well. Now, if you do disagree with me about anything, or you've got other pros and cons that you think would be more appropriate, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below. If you did enjoy this video, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, feel free to turn it on that subscribe button, make sure the notification bell is active so you're able to be notified as to when more content is being released here on the channel as well. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.